Truth. What is truth? At first, it may seem so basic and intuitive what truth is that some might even get frustrated to hear this question. That rather than bother to try and understand the question, they'll just say it's obvious, everyone knows what the truth is, it's just whatever is true, and you should know. Their frustration can come from wondering why we would even bother to question something that they believe everyone already knows. Well, on many different levels, academia, published journals, media, political news, social media, down to the bar conversation with people who aren't even philosophically inclined, a shared conception of truth isn't so clear. And I'm sure many of you have actually seen this yourselves, and often because we encounter situations when opposing views reach a disagreement. And when that happens, some people find a resolution to that disagreement by challenging the nature of truth itself. What? Really? Challenging the nature of truth itself just because of a disagreement? No, that sounds like what philosophers might do, those drunken fools. Yeah, it's true, many of the people doing this may not even phrase what they're doing like this, but let me put it this way. Many of us don't like debate-style discussion of differing beliefs, perhaps because it creates in some a deep anxiety as when we witness people yell at each other in anger, like school children in the playground, or arguments of our parents, maybe even relationships we are in. For them, that's the main way they think about argumentation, in terms of people arguing angrily. Many of them haven't been exposed to those trained or have much training themselves in debate, argumentation, or critical discourse like lawyers, possibly politicians, of course logicians, and naturally philosophers. They haven't ever seen humility, graciousness, or progress of any kind among colleagues or otherwise. So they feel all argumentation is like a fight where you can never win. There is only opinion and you can't really convince anyone of anything. You'll just end up in an angry fight. Well, that's not true. It's something that does happen and happens often enough for those who are trained. But as I said, many don't really know that because they haven't been exposed to, at least often enough, how progress can happen through critical discourse. They have not seen enough of how beneficial it can be, particularly in cases where the goal isn't to destroy your opponent's position, but to at least explore, question, and improve your own position with, say, colleagues or mentors or students, whether you agree or disagree with them. Collaborative and competitive are not mutually exclusive. Ask any mixed martial artist, chess player, or other competitive sport. Competition and even rivalry can lead to progress in the game itself. Strategies that are used. Sure, American football can look like just a large group of armored men running into each other, as if it were needless combat to the untrained eye, and that eye would miss the highly attuned strategies involved. Yes, players on both sides can have great respect for each other, even as they try to crush each other's souls. I'm just being hyperbolic. But let's get back to that more familiar bar situation about challenging the nature of truth, or at least challenging the supposed normal conception of truth. This is, for the trained philosophic eye, a strategy, and it is often employed by these anxious folk trying to deal with conflict, who aren't then aware of the philosophic repercussions. What the heck am I talking about? Well, say in that bar situation, two people are in a healthy, prosperous debate, say a historian and a journalist, both with the philosophic passion to get to the truth of the matter. They want to state what the truth is about some event, but are in opposition. It is X, it is not X. So now imagine a third person feeling the anxiety of the conflict becomes compelled to stop what they interpret as a fight. Oh no, they're fighting! By saying, hey, you're right and you're right, okay, so stop arguing. As if to say, shut up please, you can both be winners, even though there seems to be a conflict. So everyone is happy and I don't have to listen to what I believe is useless combat. They are saying, yes, what you're saying is true, and what you're saying is true, even though there appears like a contradiction. Really they want to say something along the lines, what I say is true, for me, and what you say is true for you. True for me? Isn't the truth just the truth? Isn't something just true or not? Like I said earlier, they have in effect challenged the normal conception of truth to avoid the conflict of opposing claims to truth. They separated truth to each position, or rather it's more fair to say, they have substituted a version of truth that is relative to each person. This is a version of elliptic subjectivism we'll call TFM. true for me relativism. Alithic being about truth, and subjectivism being relative to the subject, i.e. the person, me, you, or whoever. This is a dangerous form of relativism, thinking of truth as being relative or in a way therefore dependent on the person. Now there is another solution, not subjectivism, but skepticism, which isn't an attempt to deal with opposing positions by saying you can both be right at the same time, both true, but instead by saying, hey, you're both wrong to think either of you know anything, nobody knows anything, nobody has any truth, even if there is such a thing. And it also has a consequent of, shut up please. But this person with anxiety about this conflict certainly doesn't want to create further conflict. They want to be positive. They don't want to be a further antagonist like the skeptic, such that it isn't their goal to have anyone be told they are wrong about what they say is true. Instead, they want to say everyone gets the truth, no one has to be told they're wrong even when they are those who appear to have opposing positions. Now we might say that yeah, everyone can have different opinions and different even opposing perspectives, but that's not what's going on here. The conflict is in the fact that the two are in opposition about the truth. So they have substituted the truth, one truth, with multiple truths, truths for X's. And typically truth is thought of as being intimately tied in some way to reality. Multiple truths may imply then multiple realities. No! Sorry, philosophy. Does true for me work? What exactly is wrong with it? These are the questions I plan to take up in this part 1 of my season finale of my show, which you are hopefully watching right now. Why part 1? You don't want to have to deal with more parts? Is that it? No worries, I get you. Like, hey, I'm here already, give me the answers now. But the thing I'm doing this finale on is taking on the relativist, to show that while relativism is a wicked sharp weapon to wield and an incredibly important tool for any good philosopher, it is bloody dangerous, without limits. So I must explain those limits and dangers. And the second part will deal with more philosophic arguments, one could say, more philosophic positions of relativism. But this first part is to deal with relativists themselves too in a more intimate fashion. From episode 1 of my show, I spoke about reaching your enemy's organs to crush them. But while that sounds scary, what I mean is often it is most beneficial to try and understand why another takes the position that they do. Their sentiments to it. You must be gracious and generous as possible to portray, even if your enemy hasn't verbalized it, the good place that you'd agree to, the honest motives that had initially sent them down the path you are now challenging, and show them that if that good, sincere motive was their organ, which hopefully they agree that it actually was, then show them that their position now hurts that organ. It will cause them to reflect on themselves. For the logicians, these organs are like higher, more intimate premises, which often come from our upbringing, social or psychological makeup even. So what is the organ of the relativist? And how do I show that being true for me relativist would betray that organ? Find out on Philosophy Battle, the most entertaining presentation of philosophy you'll ever find on the internet, probably. Now entering the battlefield of metaphysics. Whoa. Where am I? You're 5 paces from the rock. What? But then where is the rock? Well, I think obviously the rock is 5 paces from him. Well, what if he and the rock move 5 paces to his right, facing the rock? Whoop. Well, he and the rock have moved 5 paces from the forest. Well, what if he, the rock, the forest, and the entire physical universe, if there even is such a thing, move 5 paces in any one direction? Then where is that? Well, I'd say that sentence is meaningless without some other object from which the movement to be relative to. Alright, that's enough. I didn't come here for this ship. I mean, I could probably make my way to where I want to go from this, with the relative aspects or whatever, but you guys are getting way too wacky for me wasting my time on this crazy dog physical stuff like talking to absolute space and all that crap. Friggin' whatever. Ah, that's better. philosophy. So this episode took a while because, well, bills, support me on Patreon. But because I initially intended to do only one episode on relativism in the metaphysical battlefield and decided to reread an entire book rather than selecting some small or well-known articles like I did in previous episodes, I had to learn and actually figure out how to start making selections and segmenting books myself on this. And I was, for that one episode, only going to read this green book, Relativism by Paul O'Grady, to make that important points that I wanted to for this narrative, which I'll do in the next episode now, because I actually figured I would brush up on some other books. So I reread this red book, Relativism and Reality by Robert Kirk, which is easier to read. It's neither mind-blasting nor complex. He leaves even loose ends open if needed whenever he needs to, and in the preface he openly admits that it's more geared towards someone less familiar to philosophy, perhaps. Just like a starting point for someone. Now, due to that, there are a lot of places I actually got frustrated and I didn't like it because I found how things are being phrased to be misleading or from misunderstanding. Like I spoke about strategy earlier, I'm familiar enough to be irked by some of the things written because I know the counters already, but often enough, though not always, I am irked only to have Kirk later on point out that the issue he made was on purpose, as if to take a beginner on this like a fun easygoing roller coaster. But still, there was something I was so pleased to find I knew I had to make an episode for it, because it will serve us so well in the future, and it's a line of thought outlining the philosophic implications of this form of relativism, and I feel more than anything else it actually targets the organ of what I call the enemy. It's an argument that is natural for philosophers eventually to realize themselves once they get good, you could say, and figure out how different concepts are like puzzle pieces and certain ones fit together, so I don't actually think I would really need to have a source for it. I could certainly explicate it myself, but much like my decision to focus on what was said by Stephen Cole in Voodoo Sociology to corroborate the narrative of what I believe happened that led to the science wars, it's much better for me to use a source, so people don't think that I'm just talking out of my own thought process, let's say. I don't think this argument that I will be presenting today by Kirk is taken too all seriously by Kirk himself or other philosophers either, for that exact reason that I am trying to highlight it here. Because it at best deals more directly to the organs that motivate the TFM relativists as persons themselves, rather than dealing with the actual philosophic arguments of more philosophically sophisticated relativist positions, which we will get to in those other episodes. So I'm going to empower this one then myself once it has already been made by Kirk. By the way, there's a blue book too, The Challenge of Relativism by Patrick J.J. Phillips, that I really wanted to do, I really love to do, because it really kind of dismantles the powers of this weapon, the sources that gave it so much power, philosophical sources that gave it so much power, not just social and societal reasons. And I haven't really decided if I'm going to do that yet. Anyway, you'll see what I mean. Let's start. Truth for me. Now, this is a form of little t truth as opposed to what I may have been calling big T truth in my video Relativism, a Voodoo Sociology supplement, but what I have been calling big T truth, Kirk calls the truth full stop in these sections. Protagoras famously said, "Man is the measure of all things." What did he mean? Well, Plato took him to mean everything is for me as it appears to me and is for you as it appears to you. That sounds cool, but it still needs interpretation. So one suggestion is, whatever seems to me to be true is true for me, and whatever seems to you to be true is true for you. No! Wait a minute. But that also can have different interpretations depending on what you mean by true for. If true for just means seems true to, then that just means whatever seems true to me, seems true to me. Well, whoopity-doo. Sure, we can say that's true, and sure we can say there isn't a contradiction with it, and logically repetition is perfectly acceptable, if not useless beyond simply reminding yourself of what was already established before, but you aren't really conveying anything new here. Kirk says it makes Protagoras clear but deprives it of all interest. Now, a more interesting position is whatever seems to me to be true is true, and whatever seems to you to be true is true. No! He says, that's subjectivism, and it's exciting. Note, I used the word subjectivism earlier in alithic subjectivism, and TFM is a form of alithic subjectivism. However, Kirk seems to simply use subjectivism to describe alithic subjectivism, which is not TFM relativism. Anyway, for this subjectivism, simply as Kirk uses it, according to this exciting interpretation, if it seems like the Earth is flat to you, or whoever, then it is true that the Earth is flat. And equally, if it seems like the earth is not flat to me, then it is true that the earth is not flat. This has a consequence that it is true that the earth is flat and is not flat. We already saw in a previous chapter that contradictions don't hold. Well, I didn't really do that previous chapter, didn't cover it in this episode, because I'll be leaving a discussion of contradiction and the nature of assertion and the nature of truth and philosophic language in the next episode with that O'Grady's text. So for now, let's just agree that contradictions are bad. I don't think that's a big leap in any sense for most people anyway, so let's just agree that Kirk definitely already did show us that, okay? So given that two people can have contradictory beliefs, this cannot hold. So despite it being exciting, Kirk says it is a completely untenable variety of relativism. So this was trivial, and this just can't be right. But there's a third interpretation, and it's super terrible, interesting. The idea being there is no such thing as the truth full stop. There is only true for people at times. The closest we can get to that kind of truth is just relative truth anyway. All truth is truth for me, or truth for you, or truth for, whoever. This position in brief is all truth is relative. No! Notice how this is different from subjectivism. As Kirk says, this allows too much to be true. Pretty much anything anyone believes is true, even contradictory beliefs, even when they contradict. And we can't have that. So instead for this, disagreements don't produce contradictory truth. He should have said seeming disagreements, because this solution is actually denying there is actually a disagreement in the first place. But we'll get to that soon. Say you believe the earth is round, and I believe the earth is not round. He says with this position, there's no direct path to show there is a contradiction of it is true that the earth is round and is not round. For the point of this position is to deny that we're entitled to say it is true that in the first place. There is no case for non-relative truth or the truth full stop. At best, all we can have is true for me, or true for the most educated, or whatever. And if you're confused by the most educated part here, it might be to think nowadays as the most educated being those who are scientists. So true for current scientists, let's say. Kirk notes that while when we say something is true or false, we usually don't actually use a qualifier like this, saying true or false for us, or for a community right now, or for our culture. But he says that relativists would say that this is implicit whenever somebody is saying something is true or false. We saw this sort of strategy happen in the bar example before, but I'm going to give another visualization to help explain this philosophic strategy that I think is kind of helpful here. So let me give this a summary. For this position, whatever seems to be. But yeah, so what? We're talking about the truth here anyway, not what seems to be. For this interpretation, however, the opposing propositions meet through the medium of the truth, because the truth is more singular and unified. It's monistic, you could say, mono, and thus results in a contradiction, meaning this position cannot be correct, because we agreed contradictions are bad. So for this position, it's the truth as a concept that's causing the problem. So the truth, this conception itself is challenged, and what seems to be can be true even for what seemed like was opposing positions, because the truth itself is multiple, plural for each person, each subject, to whom things seem to be one way or another. So my earlier visualization, as I stated, of the truth being broken into parts is a little bit misleading. What more fairly and accurately is happening that the TFM relativists would say is that there never was the truth in the first place to begin with for it to be broken. That they aren't separating the truth, but that the truth was always separate. They didn't do the separating or segmenting of the truth, but they indeed did do the substituting of the concept of the truth as unified with the concept of truths separate to each person. Now this kind of relativism I'm going to call Protagoras relativism, or true for me relativism. Just call it true for me relativism, everyone will know what you're talking about. He says it can be appealing, but how appealing depends on your position. Now, one who isn't too philosophically engaged might not be so restrained in appreciating how appealing it is, because doesn't it sound great? Everyone can have truth. It sounds inclusive. No one has to be told they are wrong. It sounds positive. No one gets to say they are closer to the truth over and above anyone else because there is no such thing. It sounds like there is equality for everyone. No one can have the truth or is closer to the real truth, whatever that is, you can only have true for me or true for you. It sounds humble. This is very appealing, and it should be for familiar societal and social reasons. These are the organs. But don't worry, I'll get into that later in my conclusion. But for this position, TFM, Kirk asks what's good and what's bad about it. So that's the battle for today. The TFM relativist versus Robert Kirk, and maybe myself in the end. I will be going over 3 attacks Robert Kirk has for the TFM relativist. First, false belief and undiscovered truth. It's kind of like a two-parter. I think Robert Kirk really thinks that they're closely enough related to be treated as one. Second, disagreement. Third, their own existence. And on this third one, I will give my own emphasis and empower the argument into an argument about agency and contrast that position against what I have been calling the organs of this enemy.